Hi everyone, welcome to this ProcessMaker 3 training session, which is part of the beginners training series powered by Diamond. I am your host and trainer, Afe Ararami. For our second session, we shall be discussing part 2 of the workflow designer topic, and we shall be focusing on a process designer. At the end of this session, you should know more about the various aspects of the process designer window, the top toolbar, the process map or area canvas, the shapes toolbox, and the main toolbox. Let's unpack. And remember from our first lesson, we created a tutorial playground process to allow us to explore and play with ProcessMaker concepts as we learn along. So I'm going to edit the process now, get into edit mode, and we are here. When we talk about the process designer window, it's the window you see when you are editing a process. The window you see when you are editing a process. And as you can see on my screen, I would like to take us through several sections of the screen. I'm going to introduce us to four aspects or four areas of the screen. Before I do that, the designer is where you model your process. The designer is where you build forms for capturing your data. So when we're talking about modeling your process, it will be a case of how many tasks are in your process. Who are those assigned to those tasks? Is it a user that is assigned to the task or a group of users that is assigned to that task? So we're talking about task assignment, the tasks themselves. What will be the condition to dictate the flow of the process? The forms to capture data for each task in the process, the business rules and the conditions, the permissions that users require on your process. In other words, the process designer window is where the action happens. And there are four main sections of this window. As you can see on the screen, after our menu bar, there is a blue bar that runs from left to right. And this blue bar also captures the title of our process, in this case, tutorial playground. And there are other buttons on that bar that you can get familiar with just by their names. Their names tell us what they do. The first one here is the full screen. You want to see the full screen. You want to expand the window. That's one. You can press escape to return to the normal screen. Then you want to redo an action. You want to undo an action. You want to control your zoom. You want to export the process flow map diagram, or you want to export the process. So this gives us, when we discussed the process list action bar in our lesson 1, we talked about how you could use the export button on your process list menu bar to export your process. But within the process designer window, you also have an option for you to be able to export the process. Then we have this save button. It's actually a drop down that allows you to save or to save as. Usually, we always want to save our work as we go along in building our process. Then there's the help button as well as the close button. Now, this blue bar is what is called the top toolbar. And below the top toolbar is the shapes toolbox. The shapes toolbox gives us access to shapes that we can use in modeling our process map. And these shapes are BPM notation compliant. We're not going to be focusing on what BPM notation is about. This tutorial is about you having a means of understanding how to begin to build processes on ProcessMaker. So the third aspect of the screen I want to introduce us to would be the main toolbox. This toolbox you can see here on the right, and you can see that another name for it is the process objects toolbox. Remember when I mentioned in lesson 1 that Every process has its own process objects, so variables, input documents, Dynaforms, output documents, and so on. And especially the document, input document, output document, even your Dynaforms and templates, they all have their unique identifier strings. And the fourth and final aspect of the screen that I want to introduce us to is the process map canvas, this white space here. This is the white space that's going to hold your process map. This is the white space where you are going to add shapes that you will configure for your process. So these are the four main aspects of our process designer window. The top toolbar, the shapes toolbar or toolbox, the process object toolbox, or what we can also call the main toolbox, and then this white space, the canvas called the process map area or the process map canvas. We are going to play with some of the shapes, and then we get to see how this can help us in modeling a business process map. Let's start with the very first shape in our shapes toolbox, which is called the task elements. A task is an activity that cannot be divided into other activities. So if we want to use this case of an employee leave request process, an employee wants to take his or her annual leave and gets a form, fills it and submits to a supervisor who will review and approve and then forward it to HR who needs to also review and approve. If at any point in time, supervisor is not okay with what the employee has filled or HR is not okay with what the employee filled and the supervisor approved, they can always reject the requests for amendments to be made by the employee or the supervisor. In this particular situation or this example I've given to you, taking the form, filling the form, submitting the form is considered as one task. And within a task, there can be one or more sequential steps. So while we say a task is an activity that cannot be divided into other activities, a task typically consists of one or more sequential steps working towards a common goal. So how do we get a task to our canvas? You click, hold down your mouse, and you drag. So when you drag to your white canvas, the task element is there, and you have the opportunity to rename the label so that anybody looking at your task knows what that task is all about. So we could say employee requests leave. So that's the label. You can do much more on a process element or a shape element by clicking on it, and you see other options that align with some of the shapes you see on your shapes toolbox, and then you take them and you move forward in building your map. But right-clicking and taking properties is also another means of being able to properly define your task. And there are other aspects from this drop-down that will be very relevant to people or beginners to ProcessMaker. One of that would be steps, another would be assignment rules. So you want to define the steps within that task. You want to also define the assignment rules for that task. Just quickly, I want to touch on marker types, where you want to place some marker types on your process. So if you take loop, for instance, it shows that this goes in a loop. When you mark a task to be a loop task, it indicates that the task will be run repeatedly until a certain condition is met. So remember, like we said, ProcessMaker development is like a form of programming. And so compare this to a do-while loop. Then you can also mark a task as a parallel task, which indicates that a parallel or multiple instances of the task will be executed, and the task is only completed after all the instances of the task have been completed. So quite useful for scenarios where multiple users will need to sign off on a document. The third one is sequential. And for sequential, this indicates that the task will execute a series of scripts sequentially. This marker is purely for design purposes, so to speak. It's not been implemented within the ProcessMaker BPM engine. Okay, let's go back to the non-marker type. Now, another one would be the task type. It's also like a form of marking the task. You want to indicate that this task is a user task, is a human user that is going to make use of this task. If I have an external app that I want to use to act as a user in ProcessMaker assigned to a task, I would use a service task. It's just for marking purposes because your service task and user task will still have all your steps, your assignment rules, and your properties. But if I want a task to solely use a script that I've written within ProcessMaker, within this process, then I will use the script task. So for this, you see that there is no steps, no assignment rules. So it's just within the properties, we'll configure what script it's going to run. And you can also choose it to be an empty task. It doesn't matter. It's just the empty and the service and the user, they are all basically the same. For your sender task, you still have your steps and your assignment rules and the rest. So purely for design purposes is where you have your send, your receive, and your manual. But basically, your user and service and empty and send and receive will always have your task assignments or assignment rules and steps. The only one that would not have that would be your script task. Okay, so let's go back to empty task. When we come to modeling our processes, we'll talk more about the steps, we'll talk about assignment rules, and we'll use some properties. If you want to edit your label, let's assume we want to change this from employee request leave to the label initiate leave request. There are two ways you can do that. Right, click on the task and take edit label, and you can edit this, or you can double tap on the task and you can change what you have there and hit enter, and the label is changed. How do you chain multiple tasks together? So I have a task where the employee initiates a request, but I want the supervisor to approve the request. And one way would be to drag another task here, task shape, double click and put supervisor approver. But I now need to link. An arrow should go from the first task to the second task. That is where our flow connector comes to play. So how do we get it? You click on a task that is the originating task, and you click on the flow connector and you pinpoint the destination task. So you can see that this is light green highlighted. The moment I click on it, you see that the connector arrow or the flow connector instantly appears there. I can also move this task around. For instance, I want this first task here, and I need this one to be below, and I need this connector arrow to be at the top here. All you need to do is to click on the connector, flow connector. You see two yellowish orange circles, they are nodes. If you click on any one of them and drag, you can see the other nodes on the task where you can drop. So I can want to drop it at the top and become something like this. So that's how you can manipulate or play around with your flow connectors and your task. A quick way of being able to draw your process or model your process map without always coming to the shapes toolbox to drag a shape. It's when you, let me delete this for instance. It's to use the quick menu that comes up when you select a shape. So if I want a second task, I click on this. I just click on this shape, the task shape. And once you do that, the shape and the connector immediately appears. So that saves you a lot of time instead of dragging the task here and then trying to connect it. The next I want to speak about will be the sub-process. So consider the sub-process to be, in terms of programming, it's like a function. It's not the best analogy, but it's like a function. The subtask shape allows us to embed a sub-process in a master process. And sub-processes are quite useful when you want to simplify process diagrams and you want to avoid having too many tasks in a process model. So this will make your process much easier to be read and understood. Another benefit of having sub-processes or using sub-processes is that they allow you to reuse existing processes within other processes. So let me give you an example. Let's assume that for an employee onboarding process, that HRO requires IT department to provide a PC for the new employee. And let's assume that all of what is involved in IT supplying or providing a work PC for the new employee has multiple steps. We don't want to put all of those steps into our employee onboarding process. So what happens? We create a process called something like IT systems request, and that process will capture all the tasks that are responsible for IT being able to give a numbered PC to the new employee with all the company ID and all of that. So what now happens in our employee onboarding process is that at the point of the flow for employee onboarding, where HRO needs to get IT to supply or provide a PC for the new employee, we just drag in this process shape there and call it IT system request. And once we do that, all we now need to do is to configure its properties. And then we'll select a process. So the process should already exist in this instance. So the process should already exist. All we now need to do is to select that process, configure the certain activity and the type, what variables or data points the master process needs to feed into the sub-process. Things like the new employee's name, his department, his role, those kind of stuff. And when the flow is run or a case is run on the process, the moment it gets to this sub-process, it's going to initiate a new case on that sub-process. The IT people will receive it, treat it, and at the end, it will pass some data points or information back to the main process. So that's really what a sub-process allows us to do. Now, we talked about tasks, we talked about sub-process. Let's now talk about gateways. We have the exclusive or the XOR gateway. We have the parallel gateway, also called the AND gateway. And we have the inclusive gateway, also called the OR gateway. So let's now see how we can treat each of these in parts. Okay, so let's delete them individually. I cannot delete them together. First, let's look at how the exclusive gateway works. The exclusive gateway or a gateway is always used at any junction in a process flow where the process path have two or more options. So let's assume, for instance, for an employee reimbursement process, we have the first task where employee will do what? Employee requests reimbursement. Let's assume when the amount is 5,000 or below, his supervisor is able to approve so that finance can disburse. But if the amount is between 5,000 and 10,000, then it's the CFO that needs to review and approve before finance can disburse. And let's say when it's above 10,000, then it's the CEO who will review and approve before finance can disburse. In this kind of situation, it means after the initiation task, there are three possibilities to how the process can route to the next task. So for that kind of junction or path or point in the process, we would need a gateway. So let me select a gateway here and tap, click, and we have that. And you can see when you click, it will show you what type of gateway do you want. The default is always the exclusive gateway. Now, at this point, I can have three possibilities. That is number one. I click again and select another task. This is number two. I click again and select another one. And this is number three. I can arrange this to make the process map more intelligible. And so I have this. Now, this is the supervisor approver. This will be the CFO approver, and this is the CEO approver. And after this, the case will route to finance for disbursement. Now, look at this very well. This also can come here, and this also can come here. So if we were to rearrange this to make it more intelligible, I can have something like this. Okay. So as you can see, let's call this approver. Okay. So let's use a text annotation here and say less than or equal to 5K. Click and shorten it a bit. Okay. Can even do it like this. And then use another one here and say greater than 5K and less or equal to 10K. Can do this and come and put it here. Can still use another text annotation and say greater than 10K. This, we can shorten this and we can come and put it here. So we then need to define the conditions of this gateway. Right click and take properties. We're able to put the conditions. Like we said, the ProcessMaker development, in like every other form of programming, involves the use of variables. So let's assume we have a float variable called amounts. So don't worry that I'm using hash now. You're going to get to understand these symbols later. So amounts is to supervisor when it is less or equal to 5,000. Come back here, come down here. Amount, when the variable amount is greater than 5,000 and amount is less or equal to 10,000. Come here and say amount is greater than 10,000. Now, when I save that, I have defined the conditions or the conditions that the process or the system can use to route any case moving between this first task where the employee initiates the request and the final task where finance disposes the amount. And for an exclusive or XOR gateway, only one path from two or more paths in the flow of the process can be true at any given point in time. If you do not clearly define your gateway properties clearly or appropriately or properly, you're going to have errors when people run cases on the process. That's why it's always good to define your conditions in such a way that only one of them can be true at any given point in time. So in this case, if amount is less than 5,000, the case will go from the employee task to the supervisor to finance. But if it is 8,000, it will go from the employee task to the CFO task to finance. But if it is 11,000, it will go from the employee task to the CEO task, then to finance. So that's the beauty of using the exclusive gateway, and it is the most popular gateway for use when you are modeling your process map. You're going to see that very soon. But for the second gateway is the AND gateway or the parallel gateway, the second one here. Now, let's see if we can repeat this scenario we have up. So I have a process, but in this case, the same reimbursement process. But here, I need the supervisor, the CFO, and the CEO to approve. So it's not based on any condition now. So the moment I click on the task and I select the gateway and drop the gateway, you see I need to select which type of gateway do I want to use here. If I take parallel, watch, you see that the parallel gateway does not have any properties. If I click on this, I have properties for exclusive, and I can define the routing rule, the conditions for the routing rule for the exclusive gateway. But if you right-click on the parallel gateway, there's no property option. So which means that for a parallel gateway, there are no conditions. It does not evaluate any condition. But what it does instead is to create multiple instances of the case that are routed to all the following tasks after the gateway. And so it means if you have a scenario where the employee supervisor, the CFO of the company, and the CEO of the company must approve before finance is able to disburse the funds, then we need to use a parallel gateway. And so we're going to have something like this. So let's call this supervisor, and we'll have CFO, and we have CEO. So just for distinction, let's say supervisor approves, CEO approves, sorry, CFO approves, and then CEO approves. Okay. And to make our process map intelligible, let's realign the flow connectors. Okay, adjust that. This is up. We have this here, and we have this here. Okay. So while for an exclusive gateway, you can the process can go from a task that is after the exclusive gateway. For instance, this supervisor approval task is after the exclusive gateway, and you can just draw a flow connector straight to the next task and you can move on. But that's not the case for the parallel gateway and the inclusive gateway. Why? Because for the parallel gateway, once you use the first parallel gateway, the system considers this first parallel gateway to be the diverging parallel gateway. So which means, remember now that multiple instances of the case will be created depending on the number of tasks that come after the diverging parallel gateway. We will need a pair. Parallel gateways are always used in pairs. A diverging parallel gateway is paired with a converging parallel gateway. So in this sense, we'll need to create another gateway here, select parallel, and all these tasks here, let's even assume that, sorry, let me move this. Shorting this for space. Okay, so let's even assume that other supervisor, HRO needs to do something. You can even have HRO approves here. And for the CFO and HR, for the CFO and CEO, we don't need HRO to approve. You're going to have something like this. There must be a converging gateway paired with a diverging gateway. And then you can now have, sorry, skip. Let's delete this. I needed a task. You can now have a task like this. I'm going to use my lasso to select all of these and drag it. Okay. Okay. So we have something like this, and this will now be finance or finance disbursements. So that's how a parallel gateway works. The process must be merged using a converging parallel gateway element. So in this particular case or scenario, once the employee submits the requests, and let's assume that the CFO approves it, supervisor approves it, HR approves it, and the CEO is yet to approve, the task cannot continue. So every task within the branch or the pathway between the diverging parallel gateway and the converging parallel gateway must be completed before the next task can continue. So that's for a parallel or and gateway. Now, for the inclusive gateway, let's say this is initiate reimbursement. For the inclusive gateway, it's a hybrid. It's like a hybrid of the parallel and the exclusive gateway. Why am I saying that? No, remember we said the parallel gateway does not use conditions. That's why there are no properties when you right click on it. But the exclusive gateway uses conditions or has properties. And so because it uses conditions, you see properties to define its routing rules. For the inclusive gateway, it has properties, and so you can define conditions like the exclusive gateway, like for the exclusive gateway. But it also allows for parallel paths or parallel instances like the parallel gateway. So let's see how this happens. So you have, we can have this, like we have the supervisor. Can rearrange this flow here? Move it a bit up. And then we have the CFO. And then we have the CEO. So let's take the form of the we used before. Let's say this is HR. Like the parallel gateway, we have a diverging inclusive gateway and a converging, you must use paired with a converging inclusive gateway. So if I select gateway here, I need to take inclusive, which is the OR gateway. And then we have this. We have this. And then we can say finance here. Now, remember we said the exclusive gateway uses conditions and only one can be true. So here there are three possibilities after the gateway, 1, 2, 3, or three paths, 1, 2, and 3. But only one. This gateway must, the routing conditions must be defined in such a way only one path can be true at any given point in time. However, when we are dealing with the inclusive gateway, one or more conditions or routing conditions can evaluate to true at the same time. One or more, you could say, okay, when the amount is 5,000 or less, we need the supervisor and HRO to approve. But when it is less than 10,000, we need the CFO to approve in addition to the supervisor and the HRO. So in this particular situation, if it's for 9,000, then it means the conditions here, we need a condition that will make this part true. It goes from, it creates one instance of the case where the supervisor and HRO will approve. And another condition, because it is 8,000 now, which is less than 10,000, for our CFO part to also be true. So it means we can have how many possibilities? 1 alone, or 2 alone, or 3 alone, or 1 and 2 together, or 1 and 3 together, or 2 and 3 together, or all 3 to be true. So for an inclusive gateway, we use this kind of gateway to route the flow to one or more tasks where the routing conditions we evaluate to true at the same time. Okay, so that's for gateways. Now we need to discuss, you can see that for any workflow or a flow chart, there needs to be a start and an end. So we've discussed the task, sub-process, and our gateways. Let's now talk about our events. And for this, I'm going to focus on the start event and then the end event, as well as the end email event. Now, for the start event, you drag it down, and as always, if you click on it, you can always use your flow connector to connect it to the starting task. Now, a process can have one or more start events. And thankfully, our demo process that we'll be using, that we'll be building in the course of this tutorial series for beginners, will show us, or is a good example of how you can have multiple start events for a process. You can also have multiple end events for a process. Depends on the process or the business rules governing that process. Quite possible that it could end for a particular scenario one way, different from how it will end for a second scenario. And so a process can have one or more end events. You can either drag the end event and then you use your flow connector to connect it, like you can see on the screen, or you could just go to your last task and click on the end event, and that's it. Now, an event can take up multiple forms. For example, the email message, error, signal, terminate. The message, the error, signal, and terminate are just for design purposes. They are not built into the ProcessMaker engine. But the one that we can use that is different from the empty end event is the email message event. So for instance, you have situations where a process ends and you need certain persons to be informed or notified that the process or that case has been completed. This is where this is very useful. You can then configure the email that will be sent when the process hits this end event. Okay. Now, the next one I want to talk about is the data object. So data objects is just for design purposes to make anyone viewing your process map, your process map, to make it look intelligible. So it's easier for people to see and understand visually what is going on. So for a data object helps us to indicate at the point of the process where the users need to upload documents or where the users need to generate documents. So it can be what's for input documents, and that is why the input document is one of the process objects that are possible. And it could also be the an output document like a printout. And that's where, again, we need to define, we have object documents as process objects. So if you drag your data object here, and we can right click to check the data type and say data inputs. And then we're able to click on this and use a connector in. So if you see this now, this indicates that if you double tap on it, you are able to indicate a label and put supporting documents here. So which means that, for example, this could be receipts. This tells us that whoever is starting this task, we need to upload receipts. Then let's assume the finance guys, at the end of the day, we need to have a printout that they need to archive for archival purposes. Then we also use this data object here. But in this case, when we right click and take data type, it will be data output. And then we can take a connector from this last task or whatever task where the output needs to be generated and connect to this. So as you can see, we have these two. Or we can even make it like this. Drag the node here. And you have this. So it's as simple as that. Or we could even do it this way and select this here and drag it here. So that it's, yeah, and can put printouts. Double tap and type a label for it. So that's pictorially, that's what, or visually, that's what a data object is for. It's similar to what we also have for data store. For instance, let's assume that finance, we need to pass entries or data information, pass information or data from ProcessMaker to the company's accounting system. Then just for pictorial purposes, we may have something here, and that would be accounting system. And we can take a connector to show that at this point, there's an interface between ProcessMaker and the company's or organization's accounting system. Then let's assume that the supervisor task, there needs to be input from the company's ERP system. You could also have something like that. And this would be ERP system. And let's see, it's quite a bit. And then we take a connector in. So that's what the data objects and the data store shape will help us do in terms of our process flow modeling. Okay, now the last one we want to speak about would be the pool and the lane. We've already used text for annotation like we did here, but I will show you another means of doing text annotations within flow connectors. But if you really want to put, say, a message here or an explanation that is longer, you will need your text annotation to do that. So let's assume we have an employee leave requests process for a given organization, where an employee that wants to go on leave will initiate the leave. And some employees have just one supervisor, their primary supervisor. And some employees have two supervisors, the primary and secondary supervisor. And for this process, there needs to be, when the employee initiates, it needs to go to the supervisors to review and approve, and they can also reject. And after it leaves the supervisor, if it's something that's been approved, a request that has been approved, it goes to HR for final approval and stuff. So for that kind of situation, what a pool helps us to do is to be able to create a kind of a container for our process map. Remember, we said the project in its basic form can be one process. And sometimes even in a project, you can have multiple processes. So I could draw multiple process flow maps within this canvas. And I can move and see them go up and down, left to right, and build more, and you see what I have. So for now, let me be at the top here and then move to the right and draw what I want to draw. So our pool helps us to create an envelope for our process map. So let's call this employee leave requests. So that's the name of the process. So I have this here. So while, like we said, a pool allows us to create an envelope for our process map, the lane helps us to group process objects within the map according to function or role or department or something. So let's see. For our employee leave requests, we talked about the employee initiating and then going to the supervisors, and then from supervisors it goes to HR. And we also mentioned that the supervisors can reject at any point in time. The HRO too can also reject, and at any point they reject, they always go back to um, the employee to make the necessary amendments. So a pool is used to partition processes, especially processes from different organizations, or it could be for different departments or for different functionalities, and so on and so forth. And within a pool, we can now have lanes. And so lanes can now help us to group tasks or activities in the pool along departmental or functional or geographical lines. So if we go to our lane and drag and drop it on the pool, you see lane 1, that would be the employee. And here we have our stats. And from our stats, we have the employee initiates leave request. Then from here, we need to go to the supervisor. So to make this comprehensible, let me extend this a bit. We create a lane for the supervisors. So if I drag and drop on the preceding lane, it creates another one. So this will be for the supervisors. Hit enter and typing is done. That's the label there. And for this, I need the primary supervisor approval. I can adjust this, take the flow connector up. And like we said, supervisor can approve or reject. So I need an exclusive gateway for that. So from here, we take a connector to show the rejection path. And if it's a situation where the employee has 2 supervisors, we need to be able to go from here to the secondary supervisor. So we say secondary supervisor approval. Now, this one too can reject and or approve. So we need a rejection path for this. So we can see what we've connected there. We can readjust the flows so that it looks more, has more aesthetic value. Okay. Now, see, this is what we've done now. We need HRO approval. So we take another lane and drop in the preceding lane, and then we have HR or human resources there. And we can adjust the height of this lane. Even the top one too, we can adjust it. This guy is up a bit. Okay. So remember now that if the person has one supervisor, then from the primary supervisor, it should go straight to HRO approval. So we have this. In fact, we can do it like this. drop it here. So this is HRO approval. And if the person has two supervisors, we need the flow to go from the second supervisor to HRO approval. HRO can also reject, so we need an exclusive gateway here that allows the HRO to reject back to the employee. So to really arrange this, we need to select the last line we created and move it here so that it looks better. And then if it's approved, it ends, and we want a mail sent to the employee that this is the leave, his or her leave request has been finally approved. And we also want a mail to be sent to the person that will step in the employee's absence, so that the person knows that Rachel gets to know that James is going on leave, then knows the start date of the leave and when he is returning, and that she should be the one, she will be holding the fort for James in James's absence. So we need an email end event there. So you can see here that we have created a process within a pool envelope. And looking at this, we have multiple of these inside this on this canvas. We're able to look at the title of each pool and know what process each diagram speaks to. So that's our shapes. We've used our shapes. And one last thing I want to point out, for each of our gateways, we can add labels. So this will be something like approved. Same thing here, approved. And same thing here, approved. Or it could be any other kind of label that indicates what the gateway is all about. And we can also add labels to the flow connectors. So for this gateway, this is no, which means it's not approved. But this one, if I double tap on it, I am able to type yes. Then this one too, double tap on this, no. Let's take this. Yeah, double tap on this, I'm able to type no here. So it means this flow is no, same as this flow is no. And this flow down here, this one, double tap on it, is a yes. And this other one here, no. Let's get it. Yeah, this is a yes too. So that is how you can add labels to your flow connectors as well as your gateways. So this is all we have to take for this lesson. And thankfully, in our next lesson, we'll start working on our demo process. I hope you enjoy this, and see you next time.